The classic muscle car era. Starting out in 1964 and peaking around 1970, this era of high horsepower American monsters is possibly the most storied era in automotive history. Virtually every car brand under the Big Three, plus AMC, participated in the muscle car wars, with the notable exception of luxury brands, which we'll get to in a bit. But we all heard the story. Gas was cheap, the cars were fast, and times were good. But it was not to last, as not only did the gas crisis cripple these cars, but insurance companies started to tighten their nooses as they were not fond of high horsepower in the hands of younger folk. 1974 marked the death of muscle and the start of the dark ages of American performance, widely known as the Malaise era. It will take some like 20 to 30 years for the American V8 to pick itself back up to high horsepower, implementing tech such as fuel injection and advanced electronic control units. With all these strides, the Big Three were poised to engage in another horsepower war. Today, we will be looking at the second muscle car era. Let's look at a few key differences between the first and second muscle car eras. Most notably, the first era was far more diverse and speciose than the second. Almost every brand had a hot-blooded muscle car offering, even AMC. As for the second, it was mostly limited to Ford, Dodge, and Chevy, mainly due to the fact that a lot of old brands were axed during or before the Great Recession of '08. However, we do see some new names competing in the second era, most notably Cadillac and Chrysler. We also saw some expansion on what constituted an American muscle car. Of course, having a V8 and being rear-wheel drive were necessities. The title was mainly limited to mid-sized two-door coupes. For the second era, we saw the title applied to capable and powerful larger sedan models as well. And like I mentioned, the Great Recession of '08 forced the Big Three to downsize tremendously and cut spending. The fact that a second muscle car era spawned during this time is an economic miracle to begin with. A main point of contention is determining where the second muscle car era began, and for that, let's visit the early to mid-2000s. GM made the depressing decision to axe the F-body cars, the Camaro and Firebird, after the '02 model year, leaving the Mustang without a direct or at least similar competitor. However, for 2004, GM decided to revive a nameplate that was credited for initiating the original muscle car era, the Pontiac GTO. It did fill in the niche left behind by the Firebird. However, most are quick to point out that the GTO was just a rebadged Holden Monaro. Still, it's nice to see the nameplate return 40 years after it jump-started the original era. However, if there is one car that can be credited for starting the second era, that will be the revolutionary, retro-designed 5th generation Mustang. Capitalizing on the retro-modernist craze of the time, the '05 Mustang returned to its roots and was sculpted into the original design that made it a hit during the 60s. In Chrysler's corner, the company was undergoing some hefty transitions. The partnership of Diamond Star Motors between Chrysler and Mitsubishi sailed off into the sunset, which led to Chrysler investing in a new partnership with Mercedes-Benz, creating the Daimler-Chrysler Group. Chrysler treated this new venture as a fresh start and, with Mercedes' assistance, developed the hugely successful rear-wheel drive LX platform. The LX spawned the reappearance of the Charger and 300, as well as introduced the Magnum station wagon. All of these vehicles came standard with the 3.5-liter V6, but the main significance came from the revival of the Hemi V8. The first V8 Chrysler fitted to a passenger car since the '79 model year, which is hard to believe knowing that nowadays all you hear about is Hemi this and 392 that in their advertising. The best was yet to come, as at this time Chrysler was gearing up the LX for the revival of one of its icons, along with Chevrolet's design team getting ready to respond its fabled pony car. By 2007, concepts for both the Dodge Challenger and Chevrolet Camaro were making huge waves with the automotive press, as both pony cars were preparing to challenge the redesigned Ford Mustang for supremacy. Both new cars hit the market by summer 2009 to heavy fanfare, and in 2010, the second muscle car war kicked off into high gear. While keeping up with the high demands for the Camaro and Challenger, GM and Chrysler took the time at adding performance to their luxury marques as well. Starting with GM, who debuted the V moniker for their Cadillac division back in 2004, The first generation CTSV was mostly an experiment to prove that the Cadillac brand is capable of gaining a performance identity to compete with BMW's M brand. The second generation CTSV will expand on this venture and will result in a car that was leaked better than its predecessor. The new CTSV sported a monstrous 556 horsepower and 551 pound-feet of torque from its legendary LS, leaps and bounds superior to the first gen 400 horsepower LS3. And to those who argue that a muscle car may only have 2 doors, a fresh coupe variant of the CTSV was released in 2013. Similar to the V's production, Chrysler also decided to shoehorn the top-of-the-line 6.1-liter Hemi into its 300 luxury sedan, creating the 300 SRT8. It was cool to see 2 luxury brands that witnessed the original muscle car wars from the sidelines actually compete in this one. Ford, despite its success with the 5th generation Mustang, had to play catch-up when it was revealed that the Challenger SRT8 and Camaro SS will both be pushing well past 400 crank horsepower. For 2010, Ford gave the Mustang an attractive facelift. Unfortunately, the 2010 Mustang GT has the dubious distinction of having new sheet metal, but still pushing the outdated 3-valve 4.6-liter modular. As a response, Ford engineered a brand new engine based on the modular, the return of the 5.0, renamed the Coyote. The engine provided 412 horsepower at the crank and brought the Mustang back to a competitive level with Camaro and Challenger, and from this point, the sky will be the limit. As the years went on, the second pony car war became front-page material for automotive publications, with each of the cars going through several variants and special editions. One of the biggest heavy hitters of this era was the Shelby GT500, throughout all its variations. Debuting in 2007 with an insane 540 crank horsepower, by 2013 this number will be bumped to 662 horsepower, resulting in the first Mustang to reach 200 miles per hour. A 2011 car customized to appear in the new Need for Speed film was the last car ever worked on by Carroll Shelby himself before his passing in 2012. The Corvette, which is a dedicated sports car, but it's consistently grouped with muscle cars, much like how C2s and C3s were at the time, continued to throw its weight around with its fastest form at the time, the 630 horsepower supercharged ZR1. This car will later be outdone by the 640 horsepower C7 Z06. A detuned variant of the LS used in the ZR1 and CTSV will later find its way into the Camaro, creating Chevy's answer to the GT500, the 580 horsepower Camaro ZL1. However, among the blows being traded between Ford and Chevy, it will be Mopar that runs for the touchdown in terms of horsepower. The increased displacement to 6.4 liters replaced the SRT models to the new 392 variants, increasing power to 470 from 426, with an increase in fuel economy to boot. In 2014, the now Fiat-owned Dodge division unveiled what will be advertised as the most powerful muscle car ever created, the 707 crank horsepower Challenger Hellcat. After the announcement of the Hellcat, Ford and Chevy were placed in high alert, as Dodge was flooded with orders for the new machine, even expanding the Hellcat drivetrain to the Charger. And it does not end there, as a few years later, Dodge will release the most powerful muscle car in the strictest sense, the Demon, with a supercharged Hemi producing 840 horsepower when drinking 100 plus octane gasoline, and 808 horsepower on 91. The Demon romped with a monstrous 771 pound-feet of torque, which propelled it to 60 in 2.3 seconds. This made it the fastest accelerating production car of its time, and today still remains the fastest accelerating gasoline-powered car ever put into production. American muscle was back in full swing during the mid-2010s, and it seems as though this time it's here to stay, right? The Demon absolutely shattered automotive records, so it's only natural that Ford and Chevy answer back with some beast of their own. Well, that never really happened, for several reasons. Ford and Chevy did offer parts and support to allow anyone to build their Mustang or Camaro to become demon killers, but as far as official production goes, both Ford and GM were preoccupied with much more important priorities. Of course, Ford engineers worked to revive the Ford GT to commemorate the 50-year anniversary of their win at Le Mans. They were also focused on reviving the Bronco nameplate to capitalize on the rising popularity of off-road SUVs. GM's performance engineers were also working overtime, not to beat the Demon, but to finally bring Zora Arkus Duntov's long-postponed dream to life, the first production mid-engine Corvette. There was a clear time when the original muscle car abruptly ended, 1974. The gas crisis and rising insurance prices have taken their toll, and muscle cars died like the mighty dinosaurs they were. Even though the current muscle car era thankfully soldiered on for a while, it's in an apparent decline. Let's go over some reasons as to why that is. While the big three were achieving big power with their V8 engines and performance vehicles, they had also invested heavily into furthering hybrid and electric car technology. The Chevy Volt Hybrid was sold alongside the 5th generation Camaro as being one of the make it or break it models to save Chevrolet and GM as a whole during the recession. And as we all know, Tesla will go from being a small firm that sold a niche roadster to the juggernaut it is today. Their Model S not only led the charge, no pun intended, for electric vehicles, but one of its trims, the P85D, started to make viral headlines due to its insane acceleration, thanks to dual motors and so-called ludicrous mode. The 707 horsepower Hellcat was heavily touted as being an untouchable car, until it met a P85D, to which it lost to miserably in so many YouTube videos. The Demon will later best Tesla in becoming the fastest accelerating car of its time, but as time moved on, electric cars simply got faster. While electric cars are a force to compete with, it's not as strong a force as it is with SUVs and trucks. Not just muscle cars, but cars in general are suffering declines in sales. In 2019, Ford made the controversial decision to end passenger car sales in the US, with the exception of the Mustang. And very recently, Chevrolet announced that the Camaro will see its final run in 2023. Let's face it, around 2011, these new age pony cars were the stars of the road, but now they have become so commonplace, no one breaks their necks for them anymore, not even the special models. These cars are cool and will continue to be, but they're just not as cool as they were at launch. Around 2015, the Camaro and Mustang were refreshed with their 6 generations, but the Challenger, it's now ancient. And in an ironic turn of events, Dodge has announced that 2023 will also see the final run of its current Challenger and replaced by what they dub as E-Muscle, turning them into the very electric cars they were sparring with. I guess we can say that this era is closing up like a dance club that's getting late, with folks just leaving one at a time, with patrons such as the Mustang and Corvette still lingering, as opposed to the sudden police shutdown that the original muscle car party went through. Growing up, I visited the Central Florida Auto Expo, where I would see the big three showcase their newest muscle car offerings. They had sign and drive events where I once test drove the newly released 392 Challenger, which was the most powerful thing I drove at the time. I often wish I lived to witness the original muscle car era of the 60s and 70s, but living through this new age muscle car era has been an exciting experience as a car guy, and I'm ready to see what the future holds for our American car industry.